Too many cooks.
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 Takes a lot to make a stew.
When it comes to me and you,
And him and her and the baby too. Too many cooks, it's true.
they say it goes, it'll.
What is conservation biology? Well, conservation biology is a scientific discipline devoted to understanding the factors, forces, and processes that influence the loss, protection, and restoration of biological diversity. It is thus an applied and goal-oriented science with implicit values and ethical standards. Today, conservation biology is a driving pursuit that is central to environmental science and to achieving a sustainable society. Conservation biologists work at multiple levels. For example, they work to integrate an understanding of evolution and extinction with ecology and dynamic nature of environmental systems. They use lab data, theory, and experiments to study the impact of humans on other organisms. They address the challenges facing biological diversity at all levels from genetic diversity to ecosystem diversity. At the genetic level, conservation geneticists study genetic attributes of organisms, generally to infer the status of their populations. They usually ask how small a population can become and how much genetic variation it can lose before running into problems. By determining a minimal viable population size for a given population, conservation geneticists and population biologists provide wildlife managers with an indication of how vital it may be to increase the population.
Alright guys, let's hop right into how the island biogeography theory is a fundamental component of conservation biography. The equilibrium theory of island biogeography is a theory that explains how species spread throughout the oceanic islands and inhabited islands. The number of species on an island is based on how many species enter or leave the island, including extirpation. The point of this theory is to predict an island species' richness from the animal's size and distance from the place it was originated. Larger islands have higher immigration rates compared to smaller islands because migrating animals can see them easily and have more space to land on. They also have big spacious areas that allow different species to thrive, reducing the chances of extinction as well as increased biodiversity. For example, Hawaii's Big Island will have higher biodiversity and population compared to Hawaii's smaller islands. This is also known as the area effect. Another important effect is the distance effect. The distance effect affects how many species will be able to find an island and colonize it. The farther away an island is, the harder it will be to see and find, thus lowering the immigration rate and biodiversity. An example of legislation that protects biodiversity is the ESA. The ESA aims to prevent extinctions and have successfully stabilized 40% of declining populations. Tyler, get your ass over here!
Coming! Thanks, Jeff. I'll take it over from here. Success in supporting the ESA came even though the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service were broke as f***. Recently, the FAWS have received some backlash, ranging from being opposed by a president administration that doesn't give two shits about endangered species to being sued by other environmental groups for breaking the law. As a result, ESA faced some stiff opposition in Congress and was stripped of its ability to safeguard the habitat from 1990s to 2006 until 5,700 scientists sent Congress a letter. Just one, expressing how PO'd they are. Yeah, science, bitch! According to a poll, most Americans like the idea of protecting endangered species, but others feel jealous of the attention these endangered animals get over themselves, so they feel left out and replaced. Who knew? I cry every time. Just kidding. But seriously, people hate the ESA because they fear an endangered species on their private land will prevent them from working on their projects. However, ESA supporters say that that's entirely not true. Many provisions such as the habitat conservation plans and safe harbor agreements allow landowners to harm species in some ways if they voluntarily improve habitat for the species in others, like dropping bombs on Hiroshima.
What?
Exactly. And here's some Canadian and Russian stuff that I don't really care about, cause America!
What's up everybody? I'm going to be talking about the first part of the science behind the story in this section. Let's do this. This section talks about testing and applying island biogeography theory, which basically means that they want to wipe out all life on an island and then predict the number of species that would migrate back to the island after the wipeout. These two scientists, Robert MacArthur and Edward O. Wilson, originally developed this theory by using data from oceanic islands. Wilson began looking for islands in the United States to run a test. In order to do the test, the island would have to be small, it would have to contain few forms of life, and would have to be close to the mainland to make sure immigration can occur. Wilson decided to pick his research area using 6 small islands in Florida that had only trees and a few dozen species of insects, spiders, and centipedes. Wilson's graduate student, Daniel Simberloff, decided to take the tedious task of counting each organism on the island. He broke apart tree bark and looked under the tree branches to search for every little organism that could be used in the experiment. I'm talking about every little creature on this island, so this guy is truly a noble scientist. With the help of professional exterminators, Wilson and Simberloff wrapped each island in plastic and put the pesticide methyl bromide to make sure that there are no survivors. So basically, they're using science for mass destruction. All that was left was to play the waiting game and see how long it would take for life to return on the island. Fast forward 2 years, and Simberloff searched through the minuscule islands to see if any forms of life have returned. His search showed that life recovered on the islands within a year, and the number of species was actually the same as to when they started it. Alec!
Lila!
In Simberloff's published journal called Ecology, he explains a set of ideas that help other scientists understand the geographical patterns of biodiversity. A very common question for them would be, could this island biogeography theory be applied to isolated habitats on continents also? Examples of isolated habitats on a continent would be something like the Grand Canyon or Yosemite Park. There was a biology graduate named William Newmark who decided that he would be the one to answer this question. He starts off by looking for many Northern American national parks that document sightings of wildlife. From reading that, he was able to tell which species had disappeared, when the new arrivals came, and how often these changes would occur. These parks have been isolated by roads, towns, and cities. So since there has been fluctuations in the amount of species living at a certain time, Newmark hypothesized that the biogeography theory would apply. In 1983, to gather more information about this theory, he drove to 24 parks and studied each of their wildlife sighting records. He found out that smaller parks showed a greater amount of losses, while larger parks were able to retain a greater amount of species. Smaller amount of species had a difficulty sustaining their population in the long run. With Newmark's findings, it helped inform national park policy and biodiversity conservation plans around the world.
Guys, I think we're finished.
Wait, I think we have reading tomorrow.
Nah.
Dude, you have fifth period.
We can just read it during lunch.